Hello, Mudasir. How are you?
Hi, Sai. I'm good. How about you?
I'm well. It's good to be together, my good friend. And we have a very, very wonderful guest that we'd like to get into. But before we do, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself to our audience that's joining us live and likewise perhaps listening to the recording.
Absolutely, Sai. So I'm Mudasir, working as a leadership and transformation coach. I work with teams and leaders to identify opportunities and challenges in helping everyone to operate their best. That's my brief introduction. Over to
Wonderful.
you, Sai, and then please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. I likewise am a transformation and change consultant, if you will. I partner with organizations to help them calibrate their business models and operating models for impact. Additionally, underneath the surface, I really try to help folks embrace, as I like to say, the sacred triad, being reality, human nature, and identity, really ensure
Mhm.
their aliveness through awareness and achieve that broad impact. So welcome everyone. And we want to move quickly toward getting our guest involved, but it's kind of setting the stage, if you will. Modesir, any thoughts relative to our guest before we invite her in?
Absolutely. Kristen has been the best mountain extreme skier worldwide for 12 years, author of the book The Art of the Fear. And Kristen has been voted as the most fearless woman in America by the outdoor industry in all sports and disciplines. So we are honored to have her here with us. And yeah, let's introduce her. Si.
Wonderful, wonderful. And if I add on just ever so briefly to Mudasir's comments, if you will, because I always get the question why very, very openly from folks that listen in. I mean, very, very direct and very as short as I can be. The gravity that Kristen has is very much rooted in Kristen is who she is. And there's one particular quote that she actually expressed that completely grounds things. And she said, I don't believe you learn from experience. You learn from reflecting on the experience. And I've had a lot of experience to reflect on. And what I would respectfully add on to that, and what then do you do with that reflection and learning is where her wisdom really begins to manifest. If I summarize it, if you will, the degree of wholeness that I have just experienced personally, just in encountering her and never meeting her, but encountering her videos, and I say wholeness, not perfection, not completeness, wholeness, realness, if you will, experiential authenticity in the journey that she's been on, hard and rewarding. I say the magnificent, the mesmerizing, the soulful, if you will, Kristen Ulmer. And so glad to have you with us, Kristen.
Really
Welcome.
excited to be here. Hi, everyone.
Would love for you to introduce yourself with more color beyond what we've just briefly added, and let the audience really get to know you a bit.
Okay, so my experience with fear and how I can call myself a fear and anxiety expert. People don't call it fear anymore, they call it anxiety. So, anxiety expert is threefold. My athletic career, I was considered the best woman big mountain extreme skier in the world for 12 years. And the word extreme, what does that mean? It means that the consequences, if I were to fail athletically, is either death or serious injury. So that was kind of my first experience with dealing with a lot more fear than most people. And then my second experience that led me to being an expert on this subject is I studied with a Zen master voraciously for 15 years, an Eastern approach to dealing with emotions. And then the third experience is I've facilitated, I'm guessing about 10,000 clients now in brokering a conversation between them and their fear, just to
Mhm.
see what fear has to say and what fear wants from us, using a technique called voice dialogue. And so a lot of what I'm about to share isn't my personal philosophy. It's just what fear has been asking us for millennial, and I want to share that with you all. I'm like the voice for fear and what to do about it, aka anxiety, and what to do about it. And the truth is what it wants from us and what we should be doing about it is the complete radical opposite of everything that we're ever taught to do about it. So I think this message is very important, especially for people who are struggling with insomnia or anxiety issues, depression, PTSD, that sort of thing, anger issues. So I'm glad we're here talking about this right now.
Excellent. So so what so as you kind of launch us into that conversation, Kristen, what is the message that we really should take to heart and begin to recognize and embrace, if you will?
Instead of a resistance or combative relationship with fear, like, the language, we're taught to conquer and overcome it. We're taught to rationalize it away. We're taught to replace it with calm. We're taught to let it go. Breathe in calm, breathe out your anxiety, choose love over fear. All these things that we're taught to do, we shouldn't be doing any of this. It's disrespectful to fear, and it pisses fear off. And then next thing you know, fear is retaliating in the form of constantly increasing anxiety disorders, fear coming out sideways as anger issues, which is basically fear's fight version, and waking us up in the middle of the night, kind of showing up in our racing thoughts, irrational fears, and on and on. And so, I see there's four levels or four ways to deal with fear, and we're almost entirely taught the first level or the first way, and I'm going to rank them from worst to best, which is resistance. And resistance can take on many forms, coping mechanisms, ignoring fear, replacing it with calm, rationalizing it away. All these things that we're taught to do are forms of resistance to feeling it, or dealing with it intellectually, being in your heads all the time so that you don't have to feel it. That's another form. That's probably the biggest form of resistance that I see, just being super heady so you don't have to feel. That's level one. Level two is acceptance of fear. And there's a lot of practitioners that are teaching, oh, it's normal and natural to feel. You don't want to resist it. You don't want to repress it, certainly. But that's a step in the right direction, but we're not quite there yet. And oftentimes, level two, the acceptance, there's a comma after that. Like, okay, you need to accept that fear is normal and natural, but you don't want to let it get the better of you. And next thing you know, you're right back to resistance and you're back to level one. So then my work takes it to level three, which is learning how to deal with your fear emotionally, basically feeling your fear, not trying to get rid of it, but just feeling it without an agenda. And then level four is where things get really, really exciting. And this is the secret of high level achievers, people that seem fearless, like me during my ski career, or people that do incredible things with their lives, rule the world, professional athletes, all of that. There's a belief that these people that we're fearless, but actually what we are as level four is we have a willingness to feel fear, and we also have intimacy with our fear. And the fear actually is one of the greatest experiences we have, during the risk taking process, because it helps us be sharp and focused and helps us bring our A game to the things that matter most. So, what we're talking about is shifting from a resistant or ignoring or going numb in the face of it approach to fear, to having an intimate relationship with fear, and how that not only improves your life emotionally, but also helps you expand to your greatest potential.
Wonderful.
Great,
Wonderful.
great.
Kristen, could you mentioned people really kind of falling back from the acceptance back to the resistance, if you will. What kind of guidance perhaps you offer the audience and wisdom that we can really not fall back as you described it?
I'll answer that, but let me tell you why this is such an important conversation first, so that I really get people
Yeah.
engaged. So we have this amygdala. You've probably heard of it, the two almond shaped nuggets at the top of the spine, determining safe or not safe. It's the oldest part of the brain. Like the brain is not an it's a we. Like there's a lot to it. It's not where the mind is. The amygdala does not have thoughts. It's not a thought producing part of the brain. It's the manufacturing plant for fear and anger and whatnot. And all sensory data comes into our systems. It gets run through this filter called the amygdala first. And we're talking 11 million bits of data per second. So, I mean, it's lightning fast, doesn't have thoughts. And if there's a threat, it'll produce a shot of discomfort called fear. And proven by science, it shows up in the body first. It's like flows like water through a hose, in your body, and provides for you like the perfect intuitive thought-free reaction in the form of fight, like I'm going to bring my A game to this, or flee, like I'm out of here, or freeze, like, okay, I need to gather more information. And we see this in animals a lot. And there's no thought, there's no judgment of that discomfort with animals. But humans, of course, we're very dualistic, and we see this as a problem to be solved. And so we get busy trying to get rid of it. Now, here's why this is a problem. Because of today's fast moving world, the amygdala is manufacturing fear pretty much 24/7. Every single moment of every single day, in every single interaction you have the flow of fear going through your body. You don't even need to leave your house, and it's there. And you're not going to be able to figure out where it's coming from because you'll drive yourself nuts, right? 11 million bits of data per second. Like, which one of them is causing this discomfort? Don't even bother trying to figure it out. It's too complicated for our brains. So, but you can imagine, because it's with us all the time. I mean, the whole concept of there's only love and fear and you got to choose love, like, it's a beautiful concept. Good luck with that. Not going to work, right? Like, we are, yes, all about love, but we are also all about fear. And even if you're living a really nice life, you're all about fear. And so you can imagine that how you deal with it is very important. And what happens is people get busy kinking the hose, and they kink the hose and they're trying to get rid of it. And next thing you know, the like water trapped behind in a kinked closed system. Like, if you're closed to fear, it becomes trapped in your body. And it either shows up as an exaggerated version of itself in the form of an anxiety disorder, or eventually explodes out the cracks in the form of a panic attack, or it floods into your thoughts, or any available space, or it shows up redirected in other ways that don't even seem like fear at all. And you have just caused huge problems in your life, physical problems. The fear will go to your pinched nerve in your back, or create headaches, or, I mean, it goes on and on. And so this is why it's important to learn how to be in flow with your fear and have intimacy with your fear rather than be in resistance to it. Because if you're in resistance to it, you have caused a lot of problems for yourself. As for how to shift from resistance to intimacy, well, it requires some effort. But I will say it's a lot less effort than ignoring fear your whole life. And it has better, of course, long-term consequences. And it really comes down to, and I'll just go through them really fast, and then I'm sure you have clarifying questions. First, get to know your relationship with fear. Like, are you drinking alcohol in order to not feel it? Every time it shows up, do you eat a lot of food to not feel it? Are you making yourself so busy that you're running away from it? Are you in your head all the time so that you don't have to feel it in your body? Are you trying to um, replace it with calm? Like, all of these are forms of resistance to feeling it. So get to know your relationship with fear, because you can't change what you can't even see what the habit is. So the consciousness practice, or I call it fear practice, of that awareness. Second of all, um, now I want you to start talking in a positive way about discomfort. And let's not even call it fear anymore, because most people, when they think of fear, they think of scared or afraid. But fear only manifests as scared or afraid very rarely. I've actually never felt scared or afraid in my life, but I have lots of fear. For me, fear manifests as annoyed or discomfort or anger, or I would say that the most oft way that fear manifests for me is sadness. If you're really good at blocking out one emotion, they all become lumped together and you have to feel something. And so what I typically feel when I am in a fear state is I get really sad. Other people, like I said, get angry or jealous, or anyway. So no, and we call it other names like anxiety, worry, nervous. These are all other names for fear. Nobody wants to call it fear anymore. So start speaking about it in a positive way. That's the second hot tip. Um, the third hot tip is emotions want to be felt. And so it's when you feel things, like let's say I were to give you guys a hug right now and embrace you, it's a thought-free experience. I'm not thinking like, oh, what is this like? I'm focusing on hugging you. No, just an experience. It's a no mind experience. And so the third hot tip is just learn how to feel your fear in an honest way without any agenda. That's very important, not as a way to get rid of it. And where is it in your body? Find it and then just feel it. And then can you also shift into intimacy with it, which comes naturally if you are hugging somebody. So I'm sure you have some follow-up questions.
Thank you, Kristen, for your great insights and input how to deal with fear. So one immediate question that crosses my mind is, how does the topmost level called fearless different from conquering or overcoming the fear?
Nobody's fearless. Like when I had a client that I worked with, and he went to the water park, with these water
Mhm,
slides, and he had two kids, and his daughter, he said, is fearless, right? I'm putting it in quotes, and she's like
mhm,
getting on the big water slide, even though she's small. And I'm like, okay, well, technically, she's not fearless because nobody is. What it is she enjoys feeling fear.
got it.
And when you enjoy feeling fear, you just feel excitement and aliveness, and that's what I experienced when I was having a healthy relationship with fear during my ski career. Just present and focused and intuitive, lightning fast reactions athletically and all of that. So there is, anybody that you've ever seen as being fearless, just shift your thinking. Is what they are is they like feeling fear. They don't even
Mhm,
know this though,
right,
and even enjoy feeling fear, and they have intimacy with the fear, and that's what makes the water slide so fun.
right,
If she was really fearless, she would be bored out of her mind on the water slide. You get
absolutely.
the difference? So fear oftentimes manifests as excitement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And then his son had a lot of fear. Um, I also put that in quotes because actually what's going on is, and of course the father's like, well, see, the water slide is safe. There's nothing to be afraid of. This is what typically a good father would say to a kid to try to encourage him to have less fear, but it's actually the worst thing you can say. And it's part of the reason why the kid has a lot of fear. So think again, what he should be saying to his son is, like, hey, do you want to get on the water slide? No, it's scary, right? You don't
mm-hmm,
say, well, there's nothing to be afraid of. Look, grandma just did it, right? Like, that's called fear shaming.
Hmm.
It's sending to a
okay.
message to that boy that it's not okay to feel fear, and that your fear is not real, which it most certainly is. So it makes a child question what he's feeling and have a self-esteem problem about what he's feeling, like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me that I even feel this normal and natural emotion called fear. He just, next thing you know, develops a kind of resistant relationship to fear. I don't want to feel fear, because
Mm-hmm,
that makes me feel like there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with the water slide that I feel this. And all of a sudden they're confused. And then oftentimes they fight for their right to have fear. And so they have more and more and more fear. And they're in a combative relationship with their dad who's fear shaming them. And
mm-hmm,
next thing you know, they're an adult and they have a chronic anxiety disorder, insomnia. All of that comes from dad saying there's nothing to be afraid of, which is
mm-hmm,
not true. So a better response, that creates a healthier adult that has a healthier, more flowing relationship with fear is, yes, son, the water slide is scary, and they designed it that way because sometimes if you're in the mood for it, fear can be really fun. So the question is, son, are you in the mood for fear right now?
mm-hmm,
They
mm-hmm,
say, no, I'm not in the mood for fear. Okay, let's not do the water slide. I'm not in the mood for fear either. Let's just sit here and not be in the mood for fear. And next
mm-hmm.
day you go, Okay, are you in the mood for fear today? See, there's no fear shaming. There's just a lot of love and acceptance of that boy's emotional state. Now, if you can do that with yourself too, right? Am I in the mood for fear today? Okay, I'm not. Just keep asking yourself that. And great things get accomplished only by being willing to feel fear. And I'm going to say something really key right now. Everybody pay attention, right? Fear doesn't hold anybody back from doing anything. We get that wrong. It's our unwillingness to feel fear that holds us back from starting the new business or taking the job for which we're slightly underqualified. It's like, I don't want to feel fear. And some
Mhm.
people, their whole lives, they're like, yep, not for me. I'm not a fear person, right? I obviously am. You guys obviously are because you're, putting yourself out there, like doing this kind of work. But it's a people that accomplish amazing things. It's a two-step process. It's a willingness to feel fear and then step out of your comfort zone, right? When you're out of your comfort zone and it's uncomfortable, having intimacy with that fear so that it's you plus fear equals more alive, more present you. That's the key.
Great, great.
So eloquently described. Let me just say that before I add a question or a thought. Kristen, what you are sharing is a tremendous amount of wisdom, and it truly requires a significant paradigm shift on a societal level, if you will. I
Yes.
would love to hear your thoughts on, very open, how do we make it happen at that scale, my friend?
Well, I'm working on it. And as nifty as these concepts sound, and as I mean, it just a lot of people have ahas. Like basically, if you're in a resistance, combative relationship with fear, your life is going to be a living hell because
Mhm.
you're out of flow with the universe. You're at war with your own body and the nature of life itself, and you're not going to win this war. And it just becomes all like I know people that devote almost 100% of their waking energy to fighting a war against discomfort. Let's just call fear discomfort.
Mhm.
And they just feel like there's something wrong with them that they even have it, but that's just part of life. And of course everybody goes through trauma. you know Nobody is without trauma. And if we're not in flow with the fear and the other difficult emotions that come from the trauma, then we get stuck in the trauma. you know and then of course we do all these releasing trauma, none of that's going to work. It's a matter of being intimate with it. And so I'm pretty much the only one that I found a few other people that are starting to go there a little bit in the world that's teaching this. And I mean, maybe a little bit, but then there's the comma, and then boom, but you don't want to let it get the better of you, and we're right back to resistance. So for me to be out here and putting this out here, I mean, this is my life's work. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
then the question comes up: Am I mad at people who are teaching cognitive behavioral therapy or breathing exercises or meditation apps that are guided meditations that are helping people get into a calm state rather than connecting in an intimate way with their difficulties or their emotions? I am mad at these people, but not for the reasons that you think. I'm mad at them because this shift, and I have seen this work again and again and again. I mean, I have a client recently who had crippling insomnia. He was fighting a war against fear, was living in an almost constant state of panic, only sleeping an hour a night, if that, and he was suicidal. I talked to him for 45 minutes
Mhm.
and helped shift him into an intimate relationship with fear. He got his first good night's sleep in years that night, and it's not been a problem since. I mean, it's like lightning fast how quickly this ends. Anxiety disorders, panic attacks, insomnia, PTSD, like, and on and on. And the reason why I'm mad at the people who teach, like, here's a puppy, let's go think happy thoughts, make it a great day, all of that, it's because I need their help to shift the world's approach to discomfort. That's why I'm mad, because I can't do this alone. And so I don't think that, I mean, it depends on me. You know, if I can, the more I can get this message out there, great. And but I also have, have to live a life, and so I will do my very, very best to try and get this message out. But I don't think that, because it needs to be a global transformation of having a combative relationship with fear or ignoring or what have you to a intimate. I mean, that's a big, big kind of swimming upstream message. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I'm going to do my best to get more and more people on board with this message of just going with the flow instead of resisting the flow of life of fear. So wish me luck.
And definitively, I'll say the group is growing, for lack of better words. As you said, there's many names for these things, references, etc. It's small by all means, but I think you're a key beacon in the wind. Let me put it that way, all around, Kristen.
Yeah, well, thank you. And when I first started out, I couldn't find anyone. I mean, I did this 2-day massive Google search with a friend of mine, and to try and find if anybody else was teaching this, and I couldn't find anyone. And now I've identified about 13 people, and but even them, the comma shows up,
Yeah.
right, almost every time. You know, intimacy with fear, but you don't want to let it get the better of you,
Yep.
and boom, we're back to level one. And so, just to keep it out there, and saying only positive things about fear, and changing our language. It's so ingrained in society. It's like people can't help themselves, and I do understand. But I've literally worked with groups of people for 3 hours and took them all the way into voice dialogue, and what is your relationship with fear, and can you see it's combative, and I'll even say, if you only get one thing out of working with me, just don't ever use the word conquering or overcoming in fear in the same sentence ever again, right? Because it's disrespectful and it suggests a war. And they all nod their heads, and then I'll still have people come up to me afterwards. Oh my gosh, Kristen, thank you for all the great tips on how to conquer fear. And I'm like, oh my God, like, it's the language is so ingrained in how we view and talk about fear as a negative. So to start to see it as something that we're meant to, it's like trying to get people to make love to snakes,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
hard.
Yes.
And Kristen, I love the way that you're describing it, because there's another question that comes to my mind very specifically, if you will, around the language. Language piece is crucial, if you will. And it truly, respectfully to you, you've gone through experiences where you've really built that muscle to be able to address the situation, work with fear, if you will, in a very, very conducive fashion. The question is really, there's a lot of stigma with language, right? Like intimacy. We readily use intimacy, or the word love for that matter, in the workplace. And I get CEOs that look at me like saying, what drug are you on, if you will, at that point. So any thoughts on just the language shift and the stigma that comes along with some of the language that we're talking about?
I recently worked with a group of 16 um, teenager girls who were in a treatment program for uh, like emotional and other issues. And, they were really struggling. They weren't living with their parents anymore. They were just in this full-time treatment program. And I kept talking about intimacy with fear. And finally, one of them raised their hand and they're like, "Are you talking about sex?" I'm like, "No." and and um, and I said to the group, I'm very proud of how I handled this. I said, raise your hand if you've ever had an intimate moment with a dog, like a pet, a horse, a cat. And they all raised their hand. And I said, was it sexual? And they're like, no, right?
Right.
So when we think of intimacy, we think of, sexuality. And of course, I just said making love to a snake. And I don't want people to get the impression that
Yeah.
this is
Right.
a
Right.
sexual reference. You know, it's like when you have an intimate experience with the weather, like the wind, a rainbow, a kitten, a dog, a your mother when she's crying, or your daughter when she's crying. Like it's those kinds of moments that will teach us what intimacy is. And as it translates into having learning how to have an intimate relationship with fear, it's basically doing a body scan and finding out where your fear lives in your body. For me, it's in my throat usually, or in my chest. For other people, it's maybe in their belly. A lot of people, it's in their heads at this
Hmm.
point, because that's where it's flooded to. That's not what nature intended. It's supposed to stay in your body. Or maybe if you have lower back pain, it'll go to whatever your weakest link is, and sit there. I have a client actually who has a resting heart rate when I started working with him of 135.
Wow.
And so his fear was just in his heart, and stuck there, and just like screaming at him, trying to get his attention, right? And then learning how to have intimacy with his fear, which is a thought free experience, on a dime, it got his heart rate down to 85 beats per minute. So, I mean, it's just like instantaneous. So, like somebody that has a migraine, if you that could be where your fear is now living. If you can have intimacy with the pain, of the migraine, right, it ends migraines right away. Like this has a practical use for everything. But when there's pain and you're in resistance to it, I don't want this, I don't want a migraine, I don't want this heart, I don't want this lower back pain, right? It's hard to shift from I don't want to just softening, and just kind of, like, if you have children and your child is really, really upset, and you're like, oh my God, I don't want my child to be upset. If you treat the child like accordingly, that it's going to upset the child more. But if you turn towards a child, which is counterintuitive, that is annoying you, right, or painful or what have you. And I like to see fear as a child, that's just really upset, especially if it's trapped in your body.
Yeah.
And just like, okay, sweetheart, like, what's going on? Let's spend a moment just connecting with no agenda. I'm not trying to get rid of it. It just calms right down, like children that are upset tend to do when they get that kind of connection from a parent. So it's really a self-love practice for me when I'm feeling anxious, to go to that place and just close my eyes and just connect with it. Not focus on it. That's not what this is about, because that's still dealing with it intellectually. You want to deal with it emotionally. You just want to feel it, and not about turning up the dial on it either, just meeting it where it is. And it just calms right down in about a minute.
Very, very well said. One additional thing, if you will, just a brief comment. I know Mudasir likewise has a question. I always reference, if you will, Robert Sternberg's theory of love, where he essentially talks about intimacy, passion, and commitment. And in the business context, I say intimacy, think about it as having that awareness, exactly to your point, if you will. Passion, are you willing to put the energy to engage this in a positive way, if you will, in a workable way? And commitment, because it takes a amount of effort that you will need to struggle to and hold to. It's not simply something that you flip a switch, but it's very practical in terms of the advice that you're offering. So thank you for all that, for all the very practical rooted, if you will, elements that you're putting forward all around, Kristen.
Yeah, you're welcome. It does require effort, but like I said, it's a heck of a lot less effort than fighting a war with
Mhm.
fear or ignoring it your whole life. And I
Exactly.
will say that during my ski career, I did both. And the part of me that had intimacy with fear and loved feeling fear, that's what made me the best in the world at my sport and helped me survive and all of that. And the part of me, my version of resistance was I just ignored fear. I became a really rigid person to ignore fear. It's like I had a paradox going on. I did both
Yeah.
at the same time because my whole life was about fear. And it messed my life up for years
Yeah.
until I figured this out. I became really, really rigid. I became
Mhm.
really arrogant to not let fear have any part in my life. And when you're in a sport as violent as extreme skiing, if you're rigid, you break. After about 10 years, I started having injury after injury.
Mhm.
I was burnt out, and I thought I was burnt out on the skiing, but really, because so much of my energy was spent ignoring this huge part of life. It's like there's an elephant in the room and it's there just trumpeting all the time. And I'm like, no, 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 right? Like just ignoring, ignoring, ignoring. Like 98% of my energy was spent ignoring fear. And I didn't have much energy left for anything else. I just burned out. And we're to the point where we can see 17-year-old gymnasts that are burnt out for
Yeah.
the same reason.
Yeah.
We're at the point where we can see business leaders who can't sleep at night because they're fearless at work, but now that it's waking them up in the middle of the night because they're not dealing with it in an honest way during the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then
Uh,
back to my client, just to finish with him, he was just desperately fighting a war against his fear so he could get some sleep. I'm like, don't fight a war with fear. Him, we'll call him or her. You
Yeah.
know, turn towards your fear with love and affection, and spend some quality time feeling it. And
yes.
he's been sleeping great ever since. So that's
Yeah.
love.
So thank you, Kristen. So on the similar lines, especially business leaders, when we talk about business leaders, what do you have to offer for the people who are already reasonably accomplished with respect to risk taking to be more accomplished?
It's a matter of tapping into fear. So I mentioned I did some things right by fear and I did some things wrong. So the part of me that did things right, if I'm standing at the top of a mountain and if I fall, I'm gonna die. And
Mhm.
it's pretty intense, and they're filming me skiing, and I got to be dynamic and all that. It's like I'm Batman and my fear is Robin, and we're stronger together than apart. And it helps me make lightning fast decisions and have lightning fast reactions without
Mhm.
thought that come from a wisdom that is super intuitive. It's like our greatest form of intuition is our fear. And if you're not paying attention to that, then it's kind of like if you're just trying to make decisions based on your mind, your thoughts, right? Versus your
Mhm.
intuition that comes from fear, you become blind in one eye and you have no depth perception and you can't make decisions. And you just have to wing it. And so this is a matter of tapping into that intuitive, brilliant resource that is fear, um, that helps us be spot on.
Wonderful, wonderful, well said. And the analogy of Batman and Robin with respect to the individual and fear is
Yep.
photogenic memory analogy. Yeah, thank
Stronger
you.
together than apart. That's for sure.
Definitely. Definitely. I know we're about 40 minutes into the conversation. Shall we move towards sort of some closing thoughts and wisdom that you'd like to share with the world, Kristen, all around?
Well, go to my website, KristenUlmer.com. I have a free fear and anxiety assessment on the homepage. And what you imagine your relationship with fear to be, it may be something completely different. So it's a series of 20 questions that are super insightful that will kind of get you thinking about what your unique relationship is with fear. And then based on what category you're put in, you will then get next level advice on what to do to start feeling better and functioning at a higher level. So I really recommend that. And I guess parting thoughts are, I would say that your relationship with fear is the most important relationship of your life, far more than your relationship with your parents or your children or your spouse or your friends or any of that, because it's ultimately the relationship that you have with yourself at your core. And if you don't have a healthy flowing relationship with fear, then you're not going to have very healthy flowing relationships with people around you. So I mean, there's so many reasons to have a healthy relationship with fear. That's, you know, I could probably list 1,000. But yeah, so you want to make it a good one.
Very well said. Very well said. What is there any thoughts for from you, my friend, before we close out?
Yeah, and the takeaway or the great learning from me based on this conversation is the one question: Are you in the mood for fear? So
Nice.
that question change your perspective, how you look at fear, and then how you deal with that. And thanks for that input, Kristen.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Very,
guys.
very well said. Thank you, Kristen, all around. And if I add ever so slightly, the intuition that we want to lose use all the intuition we have, especially in today's world. And by all means, this is intuition and wisdom that we do not want to disregard. So Kristen, yeah, exactly. Thank you ever so much. The world needs more of your voice, and by all means, anything that we can do to support you, we're not more than a phone call away or just to outreach. So thank you again, Kristen, for everything.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you. Thank
thank
you,
you for all
everyone.
that joined us likewise. And we'll look forward to future conversations and future guests. Thank you all around.